Some people enter your life like a sunrise. Others arrive like a storm. Luca Moretti came into mine on a night when the rain refused to stop. The rain hammered against the hospital windows so hard it sounded like handfuls of pebbles thrown from the sky. My feet ached after 14 straight hours in the pediatric emergency unit, and the fluorescent lights above me seemed brighter than usual, making my tired eyes burn. I was 27 years old, living in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens, carrying student loan debt that felt bigger than my future, and surviving mostly on coffee and determination. That night had already been difficult. 2 sick children, 1 worried grandmother, and more paperwork than any human being should ever have to complete in a single shift. All I wanted was my bed. I signed the last chart, grabbed my worn backpack, and headed for the employee exit. The automatic doors slid open, and cold air immediately wrapped around me. Rain poured from the dark sky in endless sheets, bouncing off parked cars and flooding the sidewalks. I pulled my jacket tighter and hurried toward the bus stop across the street. Most people had already disappeared indoors. The city felt strangely quiet beneath the storm. Then I heard it, a sound so small I almost missed it beneath the rain. Crying. I stopped walking. The sound came again. A child. I turned toward a narrow side street beside a closed pharmacy. My first instinct was to keep moving. It was late. I was exhausted. Someone else would help. But another cry echoed through the darkness, and my heart immediately overruled my common sense. I stepped off the sidewalk and followed the sound. Rain soaked through my shoes within seconds. The alley wasn't dangerous looking, just empty. A few trash bins. A flickering security light. Water running along the curb. Then I saw him. A little boy sat alone beneath the small overhang of a delivery entrance. He couldn't have been older than 6. His dark hair was damp. His tiny hands clutched a stuffed bear, missing one button eye. He looked up at me with wide green eyes filled with confusion and fear. My chest tightened instantly. "Hey there," I said softly as I crouched a few feet away. "Are you okay?" He didn't answer. He only stared at me. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the roof beside him. "What's your name?" Still nothing. The boy looked over his shoulder as if expecting someone to appear. Nobody did. I glanced around the alley. Empty. Completely empty. "Are you here with your parents?" I asked. The child slowly shook his head. A knot formed in my stomach. Every instinct I had as a nurse activated at once. He wasn't injured. He wasn't crying anymore. But he was scared. Very scared. "Okay," I whispered. "You're not alone anymore." For the first time, something changed in his expression. Not relief exactly. More like hope. I carefully removed my jacket and wrapped it around his shoulders. It nearly swallowed him whole. Then I reached into my backpack and handed him the granola bar I'd been saving for the bus ride home. He accepted it with both hands. "That's better," I said. "Now let's figure out where you belong." The little boy nodded once. Then distant headlights appeared at the far end of the street. One SUV. Then another. Then a third. Large black vehicles moving slowly through the rain. Their headlights reflected across the wet pavement like white fire. The child suddenly stood up. His eyes locked onto the approaching convoy. And for the first time all night, he smiled. I didn't know it yet. But those black SUVs were carrying the most feared man in New York. And my life was about to change forever. The convoy stopped 20 feet away, their engines humming softly beneath the rain. For a moment, nobody moved. Water streamed down the glossy black paint of the SUVs, reflecting the flickering security light above us. Then the rear door of the center vehicle opened. Several men stepped out first. They wore dark suits despite the weather, their posture alert but controlled. None of them spoke. They simply spread out around the vehicles with the quiet coordination of people who had done this many times before. I felt my pulse quicken. The little boy beside me did not look afraid anymore. In fact, he looked relieved. One of the men spotted him immediately. His shoulders visibly relaxed. He pressed a hand to an earpiece and nodded toward the center SUV. A second later, another figure emerged from the vehicle. Everything seemed to slow down. Even through the rain, he stood out. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal overcoat that looked tailored specifically for him. Dark hair swept neatly back despite the weather. His face was calm, composed, unreadable. But it was his eyes that caught my attention. Sharp green eyes that instantly found the little boy. The same eyes. The child dropped the granola bar and ran toward him. The man crouched without hesitation and opened his arms. The boy collided with him so hard that I almost smiled. The man's expression changed immediately. Not dramatically, just enough. The cold reserve disappeared for a brief second, replaced by unmistakable relief. He held the child tightly before standing again. The little boy wrapped both arms around his neck and refused to let go. Something about the sight tugged unexpectedly at my heart. The man murmured something quietly to the boy before looking toward me. The moment his gaze met mine, I felt strangely exposed. Not threatened, observed, like he noticed details most people missed. Rain continued falling between us. One of the suited men approached him and spoke quietly. The man listened without taking his eyes off me. Then he nodded once and started walking in my direction. Every instinct told me this was someone important. Not celebrity important. Something else. The kind of important that changed the atmosphere around him. When he stopped in front of me, I realized he was even taller than I had first thought. "You stayed with him," he said. His voice was deep and controlled. "Of course I did," I replied. He was alone. The man's eyes softened almost imperceptibly. Most people would have kept walking. I glanced toward the boy resting against his shoulder. Not everyone. For the first time, the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Not quite a smile. More like approval. One of the suited men stepped forward holding a large black umbrella over both of us. I immediately stepped back. "That is not necessary." The man studied me for another moment. "You are soaked." I looked down at my rain-soaked scrubs and laughed softly. "Occupational hazard." The little boy suddenly spoke for the first time. His small voice was barely audible beneath the rain. "Emily." I blinked in surprise. "What?" He pointed at me. "Emily." The man looked down at him. "You know her name?" The child nodded. I realized I had introduced myself earlier while trying to comfort him. The man's gaze returned to mine. "Emily." Hearing my name from him sounded oddly different. More deliberate. "Thank you. I was just doing what anyone should do," I said. Something unreadable passed through his eyes. Like he disagreed with that statement entirely. Then a phone began ringing somewhere among the security team. The moment shattered. One of the men hurried forward and spoke quietly into the man's ear. Whatever he heard seemed important. The child tightened his grip around his neck. The man looked toward the waiting SUVs before focusing on me one final time. "You should get home safely." I almost laughed at the irony. That is the plan. Rain dripped from my hair as I adjusted my backpack. The man nodded once. "Good." Then he turned away. The security team moved with him instantly. Within moments, they were heading back toward the vehicles. I watched the convoy prepare to leave, assuming I would never see any of them again. But just before entering the SUV, the little boy looked back through the rain and waved. I waved back. The man followed his gaze toward me, and for a brief second, our eyes met again. I did not know his name. I did not know who he was. I only knew that something about that moment felt strangely unfinished. 3 days passed before I thought about the little boy again. Life had a way of pulling me forward whether I was ready or not. My alarm rang at 5:30 every morning. My shifts stretched longer than scheduled. Coffee became a food group. By the 4th day, I had almost convinced myself that the strange encounter in the rain had simply been one unusual moment in an otherwise ordinary life. Then someone delivered flowers to the pediatric unit. The arrangement was impossible to miss. White lilies, cream roses, and enough greenery to fill half the nurse's station. Every nurse on the floor stopped to stare. "Please tell me those are yours," my friend Rachel said as she walked around the display. "Because if they are not, I am stealing them." I laughed. "Definitely not mine." A small envelope rested between the flowers. My stomach tightened. The card contained only a single sentence. "Thank you for helping my son." No name. No signature. But somehow I already knew exactly who had sent them. Rachel peeked over my shoulder. "That is it. No name." I folded the card and slipped it into my pocket. "Apparently not." She narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "Emily Carter, what are you hiding?" "Nothing." Which was technically true. I knew almost nothing about the man who had sent them. Only that he had green eyes, carried authority like a second skin, and inspired the kind of respect that made people move out of his way without being asked. By lunch, half the hospital had admired the flowers. By dinner, I was already tired of answering questions. 2 days later, another surprise arrived. This time it was not flowers. It was a donation. The pediatric playroom received new books, toys, sensory equipment, and enough supplies to fill every empty shelf. Nobody knew where the donation came from. The paperwork simply listed a private benefactor. The children loved it. Watching them smile should have been enough. Instead, I found myself wondering if the same man was behind it. I did not like wondering. Wondering led to curiosity. Curiosity led to complications. My life already contained enough of those. Late that afternoon, I stepped outside during my break. The spring air felt cool against my skin. I sat on a bench near the hospital entrance and closed my eyes for a moment. Emily. My eyes opened immediately. The voice was familiar. I looked up and nearly dropped my coffee. The little boy stood a few feet away holding the same worn stuffed bear. His green eyes brightened the moment he saw me. "Hey," I said, smiling despite myself. "What are you doing here?" He hurried forward and wrapped his arms around me before I could react. My heart melted instantly. "Well, hello to you too." A deeper voice answered from nearby. "I apologize if he startled you." I looked up. There he was again, the man from the rain. Somehow he seemed even more imposing in daylight. Dark suit, tailored coat, calm expression. Everything about him looked expensive except the warmth in his eyes when he glanced at the child. The little boy refused to let go of my arm. "Looks like I have a fan," I said. A faint smile touched the man's face. "You have no idea." I stood slowly. "You really did not need to send the flowers." "I know. Or the donation." His expression revealed nothing. "The children deserve it." I crossed my arms. "You know, most people just say thank you. Most people did not find my son alone in a storm." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. The frustrating thing was that he sounded sincere. Completely sincere. The little boy tugged gently on my sleeve. I looked down. "Can we visit?" he asked softly. Before I could answer, his father watched me carefully. Not demanding, not expecting, simply waiting. And for reasons I could not explain, that made saying no unexpectedly difficult. I should have said no. Looking back, that would have been the sensible choice. My shift was not over. I barely knew these people. And yet 15 minutes later, I found myself walking through the pediatric wing with a little boy holding my hand like we had known each other for years. His name, I learned, was Noah. He spoke quietly, choosing his words carefully, but every sentence felt like a victory. The nurses immediately fell in love with him. Within minutes, he was sitting on the floor with several young patients, building towers from colorful blocks, and smiling more than I had seen since the night we met. Watching him laugh made something warm settle in my chest. Children deserved moments like that. Moments where hospitals felt less frightening. I was helping one of the younger patients finish a puzzle when I noticed Luca standing near the doorway. He remained several feet away, hands folded in front of him, observing the room in complete silence. Most parents hovered. Most parents worried. Luca watched. Every movement seemed deliberate. Every glance measured. Yet whenever Noah laughed, something softened around his eyes. It was subtle, but impossible to miss once I noticed it. "He likes you," Rachel whispered beside me. I glanced toward Noah. "I like him too." She shook her head. "Not him." Before I could respond, she nodded toward the doorway. My stomach immediately tightened. "Stop." Rachel grinned. "I am just saying. The man has looked at you approximately 70 times in the last 20 minutes. You counted. I estimate professionally." I rolled my eyes and returned to the puzzle. Still, I found myself aware of Luca's presence afterward. Not because he was intimidating, although he definitely was. It was because he seemed completely out of place and perfectly comfortable at the same time. The expensive suit, the calm confidence, the way everyone unconsciously made room when he walked past. It felt like he belonged to a different world entirely. An hour later, Noah finally began showing signs of fatigue. He rubbed his eyes repeatedly and leaned against my shoulder. Luca appeared beside us almost immediately. "Time to go, Noah." The boy frowned. 5 more minutes. "You said that 10 minutes ago. Maybe another 5. I smiled despite myself. Luca sighed dramatically. "I see negotiation skills are developing." Noah brightened. "Emily says reading helps your brain grow." Luca looked at me. "Did she?" I stand by the statement. For a second, genuine amusement crossed his face. It transformed him completely. Less distant. More human. The realization surprised me. Noah eventually agreed to leave after securing my promise that I would recommend another book next time. Next time. The phrase lingered in my mind after he said it. As the two of them headed toward the elevators, Luca stopped and turned back. "Emily." Hearing my name from him still felt strange. "Yes." He hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Thank you. Again. Again." I laughed softly. You really need to learn a new sentence. The corner of his mouth lifted. Perhaps. Then they disappeared into the elevator. I expected life to return to normal after that. Instead, small things began happening. The broken streetlight outside my apartment building suddenly worked again after being dark for months. The elderly landlord who constantly complained about repairs unexpectedly replaced the damaged front entrance door. One evening after a late shift, a man who usually loitered outside the bus stop simply vanished after receiving a phone call and never returned. None of it made sense. Maybe they were coincidences. Maybe New York had suddenly become more efficient overnight. But standing at my apartment window one rainy evening, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street for less than a minute before quietly driving away. And for the first time, I began to wonder whether someone was watching over my life from the shadows. The human heart notices patterns long before the mind is willing to admit they exist. That was the problem. The longer I told myself everything was a coincidence, the more coincidences seemed to appear. A week passed, then another. Noah became a regular visitor to the pediatric wing. Sometimes he arrived with Luca, sometimes with a nanny, occasionally with a driver whose expression never changed. But no matter who brought him, he always found me within minutes. It became our routine. He would show me the latest book he was reading. I would recommend another one. Then he would spend an hour visiting children who needed distractions far more than medicine. The nurses adored him. The patients adored him. And somehow, despite my efforts, I was beginning to adore him too. One afternoon, I found him sitting alone in the reading corner, turning pages without actually reading. Something felt different. Quieter. Sadder. I sat beside him. Bad day. He nodded without looking up. Do you want to talk about it? His small shoulders lifted and fell. Dad works too much. The answer caught me off guard. Not because it surprised me, because it sounded painfully normal. He seems pretty busy. Noah stared at the book in his lap. Everybody always needs him. The words carried a weight no child should have been carrying. I stayed quiet for a moment. You know, sometimes grown-ups are not very good at balancing things. He finally looked up at me. What does balancing mean? I smiled. It means remembering what matters most. Noah considered that seriously. Then he nodded like he had just received important information. Later that afternoon, I stepped into the hallway and nearly collided with Luca. Sorry, I said automatically. That was my fault. He moved aside immediately. No injuries? I laughed softly. You asked that like you were talking to one of your employees. Occupational habit. What exactly is your occupation? The question slipped out before I could stop it. For the first time since I had met him, Luca looked genuinely caught off guard. Not upset, just surprised. Then the moment vanished. Complicated. I folded my arms. That sounds suspicious. A faint smile appeared. Perhaps. Before I could press further, Noah came running into the hallway carrying a drawing. Dad. Luca immediately turned toward him. The transformation happened so fast, it almost felt unreal. The distant businessman disappeared. The father remained. Noah proudly handed him the paper. Luca studied it carefully. This is excellent. Emily helped. Luca's eyes lifted toward me. Something passed silently between us. Appreciation. Trust. Maybe both. Noah suddenly grabbed both our hands and held them up beside his drawing. Now it is complete. Heat immediately rushed into my cheeks. Luca looked equally surprised. Noah, however, seemed completely satisfied with his decision. A nurse walking past nearly walked into a wall because she was staring so hard. I gently pulled my hand free while trying not to laugh. Nice try. Noah sighed dramatically. It would have been a good picture. Luca actually laughed. A real laugh. Deep and warm and entirely unexpected. For a second I forgot every warning bell in my head. Forgot how mysterious he was. Forgot how little I actually knew about him. Then his phone vibrated. The change was immediate. His expression hardened slightly. Not cold. Focused. He glanced at the screen and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Noah noticed instantly. Children always did. You have to go. Luca crouched beside him. Just for a little while. Noah nodded, but disappointment lingered in his eyes. As they prepared to leave, Luca paused beside me. Thank you for spending time with him. He makes it easy. His gaze lingered for a second. Longer than necessary. You have no idea how much this means to him. Before I could answer, he followed Noah toward the elevator. I watched them disappear behind the closing doors. And for reasons I could not explain, I suddenly found myself wondering what kind of life existed behind the walls Luca Moretti never allowed anyone to see. Some truths arrive quietly. No dramatic music. No warning. Just a single moment that changes everything you thought you knew. Mine arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. The day itself started normally enough. A 12-hour shift. Too much coffee. Not enough sleep. Noah had not visited in almost a week, and I found myself checking the pediatric wing more often than I cared to admit. I told myself I was worried about him. That was true. It just was not the entire truth. Around 3 o'clock, Rachel walked into the break room, carrying her phone. Her expression immediately caught my attention. "Emily." "What?" She sat across from me. "I need you to look at something." I frowned. "That sounds serious." "Just look." She turned the screen toward me. The article featured a photograph taken outside a charity event. Several city officials stood smiling beside business leaders and donors. My eyes immediately landed on a familiar face. Luca. My stomach tightened. He looked exactly the same. Perfectly tailored suit. Calm expression. Unreadable eyes. Except this time, there was a caption beneath the photo. Luca Moretti. CEO. Philanthropist. Investor. Community benefactor. "That does not seem serious," I said carefully. Rachel looked at me for a long moment. Then she opened another article. And another. And another. Different publications. Different photographs. The same name. The same face. But the headlines gradually shifted. Powerful businessman. Influential figure. Private empire. Mysterious operations. Rumors. Speculation. Connections nobody could fully explain. My chest felt strangely heavy. "Where did you find all this?" I asked quietly. "Emily, everyone knows who he is." Apparently everyone except me. The rest of my shift passed in a blur. That evening, curiosity got the better of me. I searched his name myself. The deeper I looked, the less comfortable I became. There were no crimes. No accusations. Nothing concrete. Yet every article carried the same undertone. Power. Influence. Fear. The kind of power that existed beyond ordinary rules. Suddenly, all the pieces started fitting together. The security teams. The black SUVs. The constant protection. The way people reacted whenever he entered a room. I sat alone in my apartment staring at the screen. The realization settled heavily in my chest. Luca did not belong in my world. He never had. I was a nurse from Queens who worried about rent payments and student loans. He operated on an entirely different level. The next afternoon, Noah arrived unexpectedly. The moment I saw him, guilt hit me. None of this was his fault. He ran toward me with his usual smile. I hugged him tightly. A few minutes later, Luca appeared behind him. For the first time since meeting him, I did not smile. He noticed immediately. Of course he did. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. We stepped into an empty family consultation room. The door closed behind us. Silence filled the space. "You knew," I said. His expression remained calm. "Knew what?" "That I did not know who you really were." Luca exhaled slowly. "Emily." "No." I shook my head. "You do not get to do that." Something painful flickered across his face. "Do what?" "Keep parts of yourself hidden and expect people to trust you anyway." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he nodded once. "You are right." The answer surprised me. I had expected excuses. Defensiveness. Anything except agreement. "I should have told you sooner." "Why did you not?" His eyes met mine. Honest. Direct. Uncomfortably sincere. "Because every time people learn who I am, they stop seeing me." The words hit harder than they should have. I looked away first. "I think it is better if we keep some distance." Silence. Heavy silence. The kind that settles into your bones. When I finally looked back, Luca had not moved. "If that is what you want," he said quietly, "I will respect it." Then he opened the door and walked away. Through the glass, I watched Noah take his father's hand. Neither of them looked back, and for reasons I could not explain. Watching them leave hurt far more than it should have. Distance sounded simple in theory. In reality, it felt like losing something I had never officially possessed. 2 weeks passed without seeing Noah. 2 weeks without unexpected visits. Without book recommendations. Without green eyes searching for me across a crowded hallway. I told myself it was for the best. Life returned to its normal rhythm. Long shifts. Late nights. Empty subway rides home. Yet something felt missing. One rainy Thursday evening, I finally admitted that I missed them. Not the mystery surrounding Luca. Not the questions. Just Noah's smile. His excitement over every news story. The way he made an exhausting day feel lighter. My shift ended just after 9. The rain had started again, turning the city into a blur of reflections and headlights. I pulled my jacket tighter and headed toward the subway station. Halfway there, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Hello. Silence. Then a voice. Emily. My heart skipped. Noah. Relief flooded me instantly. Hey, buddy. His voice sounded small. Not frightened. Just sad. You left. I stopped walking beneath the awning of a closed bookstore. Rain drummed against the metal roof overhead. Noah. Dad says you are busy now. The ache in my chest returned immediately. I have been working. You did not say goodbye. I closed my eyes. Children had a way of finding the exact place where the truth hurt most. I am sorry. A long pause followed. Dad is sad too. My breath caught unexpectedly. Before I could respond, another voice appeared. Deep. Familiar. Noah. Silence. Then a small sigh. I have to go. The line disconnected. I stood there staring at my phone long after the call ended. The next day I could not focus. Every patient chart took twice as long. Every conversation felt distant. By evening, I was exhausted. When my shift finally ended, I stepped outside and immediately noticed something strange. A man stood near the hospital entrance watching the building. Not threatening, just waiting. The moment our eyes met, he looked away. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe not. I continued walking. 20 minutes later I saw him. Again. Different block. Same man. A chill ran through me despite the warm evening air. For the first time in weeks, unease settled into my stomach. I quickened my pace. By the time I reached my apartment building, the feeling had faded enough for me to convince myself I was imagining things. Until I opened my mailbox. Inside sat a single envelope with no stamp and no return address. My hands froze. Slowly, I opened it. One sheet of paper. No signature. No explanation. Just 5 typed words. Stay away from Luca Moretti. My heartbeat immediately doubled. I read the sentence again. Then again. The hallway suddenly felt colder. Quieter. The building around me seemed distant. Unreal. This was not a coincidence. Someone had delivered that message personally. Someone knew who I was. Someone knew about Luca. And someone wanted me afraid. My phone vibrated so suddenly that I nearly dropped it. The screen displayed a familiar name. Luca. The first call from him since the day we said goodbye. I stared at it for 2 full seconds before answering. Hello. His voice came instantly. Sharp. Focused. Controlled. Emily. Every nerve in my body tightened. Are you home? I looked down at the note still trembling in my hand. Yes. Silence. Then his next words changed everything. Do not open the door for anyone. I am on my way. The sound of my own heartbeat filled the apartment after the call ended. I locked the door twice even though it was already locked. Then I checked the windows. Then I checked them again. The note remained on the kitchen counter like a shadow I could not ignore. Stay away from Luca Moretti. 5 simple words had turned an ordinary evening into something entirely different. 10 minutes felt like an hour. Every creak in the building made me jump. Every passing car sounded louder than usual. Then headlights swept across my living room wall. A second later, my phone buzzed. Luca, I am outside. Relief hit me, so suddenly I had to sit down. I looked through the peephole before opening the door. Luca stood in the hallway alone. The moment I opened it, his eyes immediately searched my face. Not casually, thoroughly, like he needed proof that I was unharmed. Show me the note. No greeting. No small talk. Straight to the point. I handed him the paper. His expression never changed while reading it, but something in his posture became even more rigid. How long ago did this arrive? Maybe 20 minutes before you called. He nodded once. Did you see anyone? No. Silence settled between us. I hated how nervous I felt. I hated even more how much calmer I felt simply because he was standing there. Luca folded the paper and slipped it into his coat pocket. Emily, I need you to listen carefully. The seriousness in his voice made my stomach tighten. Okay, you have done nothing wrong. That is not exactly reassuring. His jaw tightened slightly. I know. For a moment he looked away. Then he exhaled slowly. I try to keep distance because you asked me to. His eyes met mine again. But distance does not change the fact that certain people know who you are. The room suddenly felt smaller. Because of you? The question came out softer than I intended. Luca did not hesitate. Yes. At least he was honest. Then maybe I was right to walk away. The words hung between us. Pain flickered across his face so quickly I almost missed it. Perhaps. That single word somehow hurt more than an argument would have. Silence stretched. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Finally, Luca spoke again. The problem is that walking away does not change what already happened. I looked down at my hands. What happens now? He was quiet for several seconds. Now I make certain you are safe. I almost laughed. You keep saying things like that. Because I mean them. The sincerity in his voice stole every response I had prepared. Before I could answer, another knock echoed through the apartment. My entire body froze. Luca moved instantly toward the door. Not aggressively. Protectively. He checked the peephole and then stepped aside. Open it. What? A faint smile appeared. Trust me. Confused, I pulled the door open. Noah launched himself through the doorway before I could react. Emily. I barely had time to catch him. He wrapped both arms around my waist and held on with all the strength a 6-year-old could manage. Tears stung unexpectedly behind my eyes. Hi, buddy. I told Dad we were coming. He looked up at me seriously. You sounded sad. My heart completely melted. Behind him, Luca watched quietly. Noah took one of my hands and one of his father's. Then he pulled both of us toward the couch with complete confidence. Good, he announced. Now everybody can stop being sad. For the first time in weeks, Luca laughed. And for the first time in weeks, so did I. People often think life changes during dramatic moments. They imagine grand speeches, impossible choices, or unforgettable events. The truth is usually much quieter. Sometimes life changes because a little boy decides to hold two hands at the same time and refuses to let go. Noah spent nearly an hour in my apartment that night. He showed me drawings, talked about books, explained why dinosaurs were still the greatest creatures to ever exist. Somewhere between his stories and his laughter, the tension that had filled the room slowly disappeared. For the first time in weeks, everything felt normal. Not perfect, just peaceful. Eventually, Noah fell asleep on my couch with his stuffed bear tucked beneath one arm. I draped a blanket over him and turned toward the kitchen. Luca stood by the window staring out at the city lights. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he broke the silence. Thank you. I laughed softly. There is that sentence again. A faint smile touched his face. I never seemed to run out of reasons. The city glowed beyond the glass. Rain had finally stopped. The streets below reflected thousands of tiny lights. I folded my arms. The note scared me. Luca nodded. I know. You were right. The admission felt strangely difficult. About what? Walking away did not solve anything. His eyes found mine. Neither of us looked away. No. The simple answer carried more weight than an entire conversation. Silence settled between us again. Comfortable this time. Honest. Finally, I asked the question that had lived in the back of my mind for weeks. Why me? Luca looked genuinely surprised. What do you mean? You have an entire world around you. People, resources, influence. Why did helping one nurse matter so much? For a moment, I thought he might avoid the question. Instead, he stepped closer. Not enough to invade my space. Just enough to make sure I heard every word. Because that night in the rain, you saw a frightened child. His voice remained quiet. Steady. You did not know who he was. You did not know who I was. There was nothing to gain. My chest tightened. Luca continued. Most people see power first. His eyes never left mine. You saw Noah. Emotion caught unexpectedly in my throat. He glanced toward the sleeping boy on the couch. After that, he smiled more. He laughed more. He talked more. A small smile appeared. Then I started looking forward to your voice too. My heart forgot how to beat normally. Luca exhaled slowly. For the first time since I had met him, there was no distance in his eyes. No walls. No armor. Only honesty. At first I wanted to protect you because you deserved safety. His gaze softened. Then somewhere along the way, that changed. The room felt impossibly quiet. Changed how? I whispered. His answer came immediately, like he had known it for a long time. You became one of the most important people in my life. Tears burned unexpectedly behind my eyes. Not because the words were dramatic, because they were sincere. Across the room, Noah shifted beneath his blanket and sleepily reached out. Without thinking, both Luca and I moved toward him at the same time. Our hands met as we adjusted the blanket around his shoulders. Noah smiled in his sleep. Safe. Happy. Loved. Luca looked down at his son, then back at me. And in that moment, I finally understood something important. Strength was not measured by how much power a person held. It was measured by who they chose to protect when nobody was watching. Years later, whenever people asked how our story began, they expected something extraordinary. I always smiled and told them the truth. It started with a storm, a lost little boy, and a man who could have ruled an entire city but cared more about the people he loved. Because in the end, the strongest hearts are not remembered for what they conquer. They are remembered for what they protect.